Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo están todos? He pensado dar esta presentación en español porque he estudiado español para 9 años en Barcelona en la escuela y Zaragoza, pero no hablar más porque aprendí JavaScript que causa daño cerebral. Lo siento. Anyhow, let's get started. Sorry, so Jen thought she was done for the day, but that's not true. Unfortunately, Brendan couldn't be with us to actually, I was not going to give a talk at all. In fact, Jen was going to get up here and give a talk instead on Monads. So this was going to be super awesome, you know, going to have the full experience and all of that. But unfortunately, Brendan left. So I guess I'll do the mother of all monads thing by myself. Because after all, a monad is just a monoid in the category of undefunctors. What's the problem? I mean, that should be pretty self-explanatory, right? Anyways, no, this is not going to be a monad tutorial, and thank God for that. And no, monads are not like anything you've ever heard of before, and especially not burritos. So, what are we here to talk about? Well, let's go back and talk about how we build applications today. Today in large web apps, we have to deal with a lot of difficult behavior in them. Things like reacting to events, reacting to failure, in terms of how we scale out our applications. And with a few simple examples that we're going to run through today, you too can be part of that really hip crowd as you can see here. But I also like to start off with kind of a subtitle for my talks because just a title isn't enough. So how I stopped worrying about asynchronous programming and learned to love the observable. Simple enough. Or even better, I thought to myself, I know, I'll solve all my problems with promises and events. Have now problems 2i. Damn it. Oh, well. Anyways, so I am a principal software engineer and self-described open sourcer. What I get to do is spend my day on GitHub and Slack all day, and I get paid for it. You know. And so in addition to working on what I'm talking about today, I'm also working on a peer web project to build peer-to-peer web apps using your phone in JavaScript on iOS, Android, and so forth. And hopefully you'll be seeing more of that in the coming months. But anyways, I work for the small startup you might have never heard of before. And, you know, I like to say that, you know, since we're in South America and they love their metal, I thought I would add a little bit more metal to the conversation here. So really what we're talking about today and what I'm working on mostly is the reactive extensions and how they can really help you. And I've been working on this since 2010, which is kind of surprising when you think about it, that you know, you're really starting to hear about it now, even though I've been working on this code for 5 years now. And yes, I am a drug pusher. What can I say? So let's actually take a look. You know, when you're solving asynchronous and event-based problems, really what you're trying to do is you're saying, okay, I have some hard problems, or in some cases not so hard problems, such as, you know, event coordination is pretty darn simple sometimes. But then you want to start getting into game programming when you're having to do multiple things, when you're talking about collision detection, whether you're talking about reacting to events, all of those sorts of things suddenly become very, very important as you're creating these applications. So of course, gaming obviously is one of those things where it obviously makes a lot of sense is to have some sort of framework to really help you build something like this, where if I keep on going in one direction, he doesn't go off the screen, there's gravity, and so forth. And to other things such as chat applications, so I can type in here, hola mundo, I think that's what I said. Yes, there it is. Okay. And then finally, to building something a lot more complex, like a Netflix or even any old video player. So, for example, we can watch live TV, all using the power of Rx. Okay, that's kind of annoyingly loud. And help. There we are. Okay. So anyways, those are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we're building these really responsive apps. So how do we actually do that is a really good question. So we have Rx, and obviously I am a pusher, but let's talk about one thing in particular that a lot of people, oops, center view. There we are. So let's talk about one in particular that a lot of people have heard of, a small company called Netflix that happens to stream movies. And the idea there is, of course, they want to stream from every single device. And in the US alone, they account for 1/3 of the US total broadband traffic. So they have some really big problems, just as well as any other company has some really big problems. And so they had to, along with us and many other companies, think very differently about how we're going to build our applications, especially at scale. And how we did that was thinking a little bit differently about how we thought about events. So everything that you see when you have the Netflix app, whether it's on your phone, whether it's on your smart TV, whether it's built into onto your computer, is all using the same kind of code base. And they have to basically be asynchronous about everything that they do, from startup to the player itself, to animations and so forth. But it's a nightmare. Why? Because you have so many other things that you have to worry about. Memory leaks, like event handlers that just get tossed away. You have callback hell, which is really a thing. Disjointed state machines, so I'm not really sure exactly where I am in this state machine, whether something's been set or hasn't been set, and really no common way of error handling. So if we step back in time, what they found was that they came in and it was a totally disjointed code base that they had to deal with. And so what they started to do is to start realizing that if they started to use something like observables, which I'm talking about today, it's a multi-platform, multi-paradigm kind of way of thinking about events. And they were able to train up their developers not only on JavaScript version, but the Java, C#, and so forth. So no matter where they were going, whether they were on the client or on the server, they could still kind of speak the same language, even though they're not using the same programming language. So why are we even bothering here? Is because right now, real-time web is everywhere. So you're constantly dealing with these events, and it's so easy to get overloaded where you're just tossing events away. You just can't keep up. And obviously, that little slide, that demo of the video player has a lot of those kinds of things built into it, such as buffering and so forth. But how do you start to manage all of these things like GPS events, anything that's on your phone, and kind of coordinate them all together? It gets very hard and it gets very disjointed, especially when you're trying to handle AJAX requests, you're trying to handle failures and so forth. And especially the biggest thing that we face is the fact that asynchronous programming is just god-awful. I mean, let's face it, it's just that we try to juggle so many things at once, and we just utterly fail at that. Why he couldn't just put it on the ground, I don't know. But, oh well. And it became such a problem that even past presidents of the United States have actually tried to solve this. And it says we choose to go and solve asynchronous programming, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And he said that in 1962, which is really kind of telling because we hadn't even gone to space or the moon. And then he realized after talking with his top advisors that really going to the moon was a little bit easier. So he kind of changed it a little after the fact, I think. So callback hell, and what people call callback hell, is a real thing. And in fact, it's not just the fact that your code is just walking off the side of the stream. You're trying to build a fairly complex state machine. For example, here I would have a movie ticket and the player error. And then somewhere in here, I'm going to actually set the player error and try it and finish, or else I'm going to try and authorize what happens. And instead, what you get is something like la cabeza de vaca, or a cow's head, where it just walks off the screen and walks right back. It's really hard to follow, and it's really easy to burn yourself really, really quickly. Yeah, I feel like throwing myself out a window, too, when I have to deal with callbacks. Anyways, so even dealing with events, even the very simple things, like drag and drop, is not as easy as you think it is. Why? Because you have to have this state hanging around here. You have to handle the mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up. You have to add the handlers, then you have to remove the handlers. Then, well, you have to decide what you're going to do with that when it comes in. So how do I start composing with other things? Well, now that logic is hidden way down here. I don't know. So, you know, to me, it's kind of like the enemy of state. Oops. It's really kind of trying to juggle too many things at once and failing miserably. So why don't we start thinking a little bit differently? Well, we kind of did. In ES 2015, we have promises. Yay, promises. So we could easily take that state machine that we had before and then say authorize movie, login error, play with the movie, or they are unauthorized. That's great. Now we can have a thing where we have this first-class asynchronous value that I can just hand to people. And now they can suddenly resolve it, get the data, and do what they need to do. But the problem is that there are many things that are actually wrong with promises as they are in terms of the standardization right now. Like, for example, if I'm going to do a type-ahead kind of situation, the problem is that promises by themselves do not support cancellation at all. You can work around it yourself, but by default, it doesn't have it. So you're like, how do I stop it? I guess it's just going to give me a result whether I liked it or not. And so, of course, the web being what it was, says, yes, let's put promises everywhere, including on the fetch API so that web workers and all of that could use it. The problem was, they're like, oh, let's go and let's replace XHR. They're like, oh, crap, I can't cancel it? So it turned into a very long discussion, and as you can see, it started on March 26th, and there are 204 comments and 21 people that happen to be participating, which kind of brings up the joke of how many developers does it take to cancel a promise? Guess it's 21. And I don't think they're even there yet, so it might be more than that. And just as well, with the final countdown is the fact that I can't do something like this where I can say get the resource and then finally just get rid of it. Just, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. There is no such thing as I am done, I want to clean up. So at a certain point, it becomes a very nice car without a set of brakes. And going on some of these Colombian roads, whew, without brakes, wow. Anyway, so why don't we just talk about stream processing then? Why? I mean, after all, it's pretty simple, right? No, it wasn't. Let's face it, streams in Node, and at least the first set of ones were pretty terrible. And the fact the pause didn't really pause, data started immediately whether you were listening or not. Yeah, I couldn't say I want 5 bytes, 6 bytes. And pause and resume were just impossible to get right, which is basically what this kid was finding out, is that data would just flow whether he was ready or not. So even still in Node 2, then they're like, oh, then we need like 4 different subclasses of streams. So let's do, readable, writable, transform, duplex. Well, it's easy to get tripped up on that because now you have to implement the read, write, and transform methods yourself. Great, thanks. And then what's worse is that they add more complication. Like now you can do bulk reads and bulk writes. Well, now it gets even more tangled. So let's step back a little bit in time to a time when probably many of you weren't even born yet, I'm sure. To 1994. I was a teenager way back when, few pimples. And there was this book that came out, and I don't know if anyone still reads this book, but it was a very interesting book that, for the first time, took a lot of design patterns and put them into a single book. And there were many of them that came out. But the most important ones, to me, were the iterator and the observer, or subject observer, as I call it. But there was no direct link between them at all in that book. And I think they're wrong. And the reason why is, let's see, well, we've got an iterator in ES 2015 where we can now just start getting data as we call next on it. Great. It's perfect. Now, on the other hand, when we deal with the DOM, we've been doing with the subject-observer pattern since the very beginning. Add event listener, remove event listener, and then when I start to move the mouse, yay, data. So let me ask you a simple question, very simple question. What's the difference between an array, as we saw, and an event? I would say there's nothing different about them. In fact, they are both collections. That the fact that a mouse is a collection of mouse moves, of clicks, of mouse ups, mouse downs, and so forth. In so much so that WebSockets are also collections that you should be able to query. Why not? So let's walk you through a few of these kind of things where you can build really powerful applications with just a small amount of code. So, for example, if you took my workshop yesterday, we talked about some of these, but map. So the idea that we could take a single item from a collection, whatever it happens to be, fundamentally transform it, and create a new collection on the other side. Pretty simple. And filter, of course, we can say we apply a function in which we check whether it satisfies a condition, and then we emit the results at the end. Now, this one gets a little bit more mind-boggling because you're like, flat map, that just doesn't really make any sense at all. Well, it kind of does, because what you're doing is you're going to apply that map function that we talked about earlier, but then we're going to say merge it all into a single stream, smooth it out. And the reason why that's interesting is now we can start to compose together, say, a set of mouse or key up events, now with an AJAX call, which are both observables, both collections. Now you can start to compose those together. So I say to the end of iteration and start using the things that we just learned here. Now, if we are going to actually do this in practice, let's say we're looking at the Netflix code base. And like I said, this comes from real honest-to-God code, where we can say get top-rated movies for a particular user. We're going to flat map to get the video lists. We're going to go through the videos and filter out where the rating is 5. Then I can just pass in, get the movies for me, and then I can do a for each and display each thing. Now, what if I told you that same code that we just used there is absolutely usable with the same code to do mouse movements? And really it is, I swear. So, for example, here, if I say get element drags, passing in an element, I say DOM on mouse down, passing in the element, flat map, so I can now return another collection, And then instead of filter here, filter's useful, but not necessarily with events, because now I can say with take until, I suddenly stop listening because the other thing happened. And now you get this Zen-like moment when you just realize, wow, everything's a stream. And you're like, I can query this. I know these 4 operators. I can do anything. This is great. And now we have the idea that for not only for single values, but for multiple values, we have this first-class object. And that first-class object that I can create, and I can pass into a function, and I can return them from a function. So when we're really talking about it, we're talking about 4 ways of thinking. We're talking about synchronous, asynchronous. We're talking about multiple values and single values. So with multiple values, you get an array. You can do map and filter and for each. Single values, you can deal with a promise. And over in the right-hand corner, where, like I said, it gets more interesting, is the fact for multiple values, you can deal with a observable. But if you look at the code, it's absolutely the same. And that's what I'm trying to get through, is that you already know how to do this. So when I mention the word reactive programming to you, what happens? That. It undid so many good things that I was like, yes, reactive programming is really taking off. This is a good thing. And then Facebook comes and takes the name and does something that's not really reactive at all. Oh, well. So what is reactive programming anyhow, really? If you go to Wikipedia, it's a terrible, terrible description. It's all this computer science jargon that really doesn't tell you what it means, other than the fact of, well, if I look in the dictionary, readily responsive to stimulus and active and ready to receive events. Duh, well, we've been doing that for God knows how long. Just look at jQuery, like, woo, click and this and slide up and all of those other things were very reactive. And the project managers are like, psh, you hipsters, we've been doing that forever in Excel. So, like I said, it might surprise you that you've been doing reactive programming whether you've known it or not. But if you really wanted to learn where the term came from itself, yeah, you can read a paper about it. But I realize that when I give you a paper, chances are you're going to be your reaction when you look at most computer science papers, and I'm just as guilty. And there are some very brilliant people in the community that have that same reaction when they think about these advanced kind of topics. But those industrious Germans actually came up with a word that actually describes this phenomena really well, and it's that. Can you pronounce it? Computerwissenschaft akademische Papierphobie. The fear of academic papers. Something like that. God bless those Germans. So then when people start to talk about reactive programming, they talked about functional reactive programming, but it's a completely different topic altogether, unfortunately. So what they do is they conflate the 2 things, which it's entirely different, the idea that you have consistent time versus discrete time. So think of a clock as your discrete time, and your continuous time, and events such as a mouse click as discrete. Not really super interesting, but that's kind of what functional reactive programming means. So quite honestly, call us something else. El Deuterino if you're not into the whole brevity thing. I don't care. But how it works is something like this, where you get to a point where you can start to create your things where you can get 0 to infinite values followed by an on arrow on completed. Pretty simple kind of things. You can't have overlaps. You can't have anything that happens after it's done. So all of the cleanup is just magic. And in fact, it really is that easy. So let's talk about some real life code that people use today to solve some really hard problems. So if I was to do a Typeahead, how many people have actually implemented a Typeahead? How many people have done it successfully? And put it in production? Wow, a few people. Brave, brave souls. So I actually wrote this one completely in jQuery. Can you read it? No. Yeah, I didn't think so. So it's write more, do less. So to do it with what we're talking about and the things that we've already learned, we can take the we can do a map. We can do a debounce, which basically means we're going to wait a little bit, make sure it's distinct, do a flat map. The latest is not super, super important, just to make sure that the results never come out of order. And then we just subscribe directly to the UI. Done. I didn't have to write those 2 pages of code to do that. Now, the observable stuff that we've already kind of covered is interesting, but it's more interesting when you start to look at some real-life examples. When you, for example, look at how you keep, when you're dealing with Netflix, so for example, you're trying to keep only what's on the screen in memory, and as soon as it gets out of the screen, then you want it completely gone. All of the handlers, everything. How do you do that? Well, what you have to do is you have to take the scroll event and debounce it a little bit and make sure whether the rows are hidden or not. And then just start listening in the background, and then once the row is hidden, get rid of it. And just as well, you know, when we had our callback hell with our player, or la cabeza de vaca, we could do it as simple as this. And not only that, but we can add, unlike promises, I can just add three retries and take until someone hits the cancel button. So instead of getting burned, we're actually fairly safe. Now Slack, how many people use Slack here? All right, you're also using RX. So, just you know, an FYI. But how do they implement some really kind of interesting things? So for example, when you're typing and it suddenly changes your text, how does it do that? Have you done something like that before? And chances are it's a lot of code. But here, what we can do is we can start we can start to take a look at the code and say, I want to get a notification when someone starts typing. And then at the beginning, I'll set a set of keystrokes, but I don't really want to listen to all of them. But really, when they start to break, that's when I can do that language detection and say, oh, suddenly they're speaking Spanish, therefore I need to get that language, and then I need to apply the dictionary. That's all this is. You know, it looks a little more complicated than that, but that's really what we're doing here. And so it's solving some really hard problems as we're dealing with real-time applications. And all of these you can take a look at afterwards, but it's really kind of cool because now that final countdown that we had before, we can do just as easily by catching finally and doing a for each over the data. And yes, we can do back pressure a lot better than Node can in some respects. And we also can deal with dealing with React, dealing with Angular, and so forth, in so much so that if you're using Angular 2, you get RX for free. Cool. So by default, RX comes out of the box. And what was really kind of interesting about that was the fact that many people said, okay, what's your favorite data query library? And they said, well, RX was, which was kind of surprising to me, you know, figuring Meteor and all of those things were out there. So anyways, when you're dealing with React, this is kind of a big, perfect way of how you deal with state. Because what you can do on the component mount and the component unmount is you can build it up and say, set it for every second to update the state. And then when it unmounts, you can clean up everything and no handlers are ever leaked. And that's a really kind of powerful thing, is suddenly all of this logic, all of these mouse movements and all that we did before suddenly becomes very easy. And just as well with schedulers is another notion where, for example, the how, what, and where, and how of how I'm actually going at the deep, deep level of actually scheduling something. So imagine if we're trying to, write a data UI, and I'm like, oh yeah, just pick some random scheduler and do some fancy drawing. Well, it just doesn't work that way. In fact, it'll probably make your CPU, your computer fly away because your fan is going so high. But instead, if you suddenly thought about it and said request animation frame scheduler, now I swap that out completely. So every time something happens, it happens on request animation frame. And just as we're getting async await in JavaScript, which is great, when dealing with promises, we can do that today in Rx. In fact, we can still do the retry, get a cached version, and do cleanup. But of course, JSConf.co will never go down, so we don't really have to worry about that, right? But what's also kind of interesting is the fact that observables actually might be coming to ES 2016. It's undergoing standardization right now. I don't know if it's actually going to get through or not, but I certainly hope so. But the idea now is that we can have first-class events in JavaScript. Right now, unfortunately, there is no such thing as an event in JavaScript. It either comes from Node or it comes from the DOM, but inside the JavaScript language, it doesn't exist. So you could actually do some things like mouse movements and mouse drags and so forth using this specification. And of course, we're actually rewriting it right now in conjunction with Google and in conjunction with Facebook and with Netflix. So who would have thought that Google and Microsoft and Netflix would work together on a single anything? But we did. So that's the kind of thing that I think is really, really powerful. Now, I just want to leave you with one word, and that word is push, because remember, when we're dealing with observables, we're dealing with push collections, right? Versus arrays where we're pulling these values out. Anytime, the mouse moves, we get pushed to new values. So I just want you to remember the word push.
Yeah, that was rad. I think I can do it too. Push! 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 You let me do one alone. Push! That was good. It wasn't that good.
Muchas gracias.